Hi, everybody, and welcome to this short presentation on Northwest Coast art, or the art of the Pacific Northwest First Peoples. Now, off the bat, I just want to note that Northwest Coast art is a homogenizing term, and it places all the diverse cultures on the coast under this large umbrella. It really doesn't do anything to acknowledge each community's distinctiveness. However, as this is the most widely used term to describe arts from this region, and that's likely not going to change soon. I use this term self-consciously and as a very general category. And where possible, I do refer to specific people or communities or cultures like the Coast Salish or the Haida or Tsimshian. Now, this is just a brief outline. And first, I want to talk about terminology and that term art. And then I just want to go into the potlatch, which is the context in which for which a lot of art for Indigenous peoples on the coast is created. So there is a tendency in settler society to categorize the various material expressions and belongings of cultural others as artifacts or specimens or art. And these are problematic ways of representing and evaluating non-Western creations. So why are these problematic? Well, these designations, when applied to the work of Indigenous creations, really silences the history and the meaning behind these objects and the way that they have been and continue to be created and circulated within and beyond their communities of origin. So if we take the concept of art, for example, you often hear Indigenous creators and academics and other knowledgeable people state that in our language there is no equivalent to the term art. And this is because the term art that is employed to describe so many creative works today has strong associations with the European avant-garde and Western notions of art as purely aesthetic, or art for its own sake. So that is, it really has no other function than its aesthetic qualities. So we have to remember that art is a specific term with its roots in 16th century Europe, and its meaning is largely still maintained today. So within this paradigm, the highest forms of art are those that are most free from nature, art that serves no purpose other than being viewed and appreciated. So not surprisingly, Europeans have deemed the lowest forms of art as those that are utilitarian or have other functions connected to nature. For example, totem poles, baskets, rattles, hats, weavings, these all serve purposes other than being purely aesthetic. So with this history in mind, we can start to see that the term art is not really capable of fully capturing the meaning and the values embedded within many Indigenous creations. Additionally, the settler use of this term art is often linked to the emergence of the artist as this autonomous creator and notions of individual genius and individual ownership. So for example, I've put this picture, this painting here by Jackson Pollock, because it kind of brings to mind this notion of an individual genius splashing paint on a canvas, someone who's experimental and boundary pushing and innovative. And this is not to say Indigenous artists are not all those things, but that Indigenous artists are very often drawing on shared cultural knowledge when they're expressing themselves artistically. And although they are expressing themselves as artists, their work is rarely divorced from the stories and the teaching and events and the knowledge of their community. So what many of us commonly term Indigenous art may have other qualities or associations, not knowable visually, and which may actually be more significant. For example, how well is it constructed to ensure its function? A canoe has to be perfectly engineered to work in the open ocean, or a basket or box needs to be perfectly executed to properly hold water, for example. So, right, these are functions that go beyond just visual. Some pieces have to be produced with ritual correctness when gathering raw materials, such as harvesting cedar for baskets or spruce roots for hats, or maybe even mountain goat hair for a textile. It has to be done with the proper observances and prayers. Acts of reciprocity, or maybe giving thanks to these gifts that the artist or the maker is receiving. So the work may also have inherent powers. Because of the object's original conception might have come from a dream, or maybe due to how many times the work has been used in ceremony, Many Indigenous peoples today, encountering their belongings in museums, feel a closeness to their ancestors, and this is not a part of something aesthetic or purely visual. So, looking at Northwest Coast First Nations, those peoples whose territory span basically from northern Oregon to southeast Alaska, much of what we would call art today had and still has an important social and legal function that goes beyond aesthetics. This is what Haida scholar and museum director at Jisgang, Nika Collison, calls the art's truest function. Much of the art on the Northwest Coast is linked to large feasts known as potlatches. I'm sure many of you have heard of this term. These are large social gatherings and feasting events practiced all along the coast. Each culture has their own version and their own name for them in their own language, but we use this umbrella term often, which is derived from a New Chalmouth word meaning to give away. So during these feasts, a great family can show its worthiness to inherit and hold titles and prerogatives by lavish feasting and generously reciprocating to those who attend and witness the events taking place. So at a potlatch, rights to inheritance of wealth and power are displayed and validated, and this includes rights to names, titles, associated land, property, fishing holes, berry patches, beachfronts. The occasion could be the naming of a child, a newborn, a coming of age ceremony, a marriage, adoption, funeral, or the passing of a chiefly title to a successor. So I really like this image. It shows the blankets being accumulated and stored to be distributed to guests at a potlatch in Alert Bay in about 1890. And these are being distributed as reciprocity for the people's attendance and witnessing at these events, which validates the proceedings. So a great deal of material heritage is distributed at a potlatch. Masks, canoes, ceremonial blankets, and hats, for example. This is the tangible stuff that is often designated as art. Along with the tangible goods, there's intangible rights attached to these items, and this is also distributed. So stories and songs and dances and specialized knowledge, rights to use and display certain crest designs. Crest designs are stylized representations of animals or events. So these intangibles are considered property as well. A song, a story, these things can be the property of a family. And for others to use these without the authorization of the owners is a major social transgression, like going and using someone's credit card. Unauthorized use requires restitution to be paid to the owner. The intangible property, the property rights, stories, songs, dances, knowledge, are all attached to the physical objects or artworks. They're really one and the same. So this is much like how a paper contract or a land title in settler society represents an intangible agreement or stands in for a set of rules or rights to access a piece of land, or maybe binds the signatories in a particular relationship, right? So you can't physically touch my right to own my townhouse or the agreement I have with my employer to show up on time. These things are only made manifest or tangible in their material form, the paper they're recorded on. So in settler society, we recognize the material contract, the land title, the lease agreement, the bill of sale, as the intangible right or responsibility in itself. But it's just an arbitrary piece of paper. Think of money, for example. It's a really good example. It has no intrinsic value. It's just this plasticky paper and worthless chunks of metal. But the value we place in it, it really has nothing to do with its physical form. Its value and its meaning is an agreed upon one, and it's regulated by laws and policies and social norms in our society. So therefore, we experience a $100 bill as just that. It's $100. So for coastal First Nations, it is the same but different. We can't draw perfect parallels because they don't exist, but these are examples to help you try to conceptualize the function that these objects play in Indigenous societies. So the mask or the totem pole or what have you is the embodiment of the intangible knowledge or rights that it's associated with. So passing them down in the right way involves reciting their history and genealogy of succession and the meanings and values that have accumulated with each transmission. And these ceremonies And all the tangible and intangible property that is exchanged constitutes the legal system of the people who practice the potlatch. So the name given, the title bestowed, rights and prerogatives inherited are not legally valid unless the transmission has been done in the right way and witnesses have been compensated.